Welcome to Global Perspectives. What's it like to be known as one of America's premier veteran journalists? Ray Suarez knows. He's here to talk about his compelling coverage of some of the critical issues of our time.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Ray.
Great to be here.
I don't know where to start. You've covered so many issues in your various incarnations in journalism, but talk to us about being not just a veteran journalist, but a premier veteran journalist. What does that mean?
It's not a title I gave to myself, believe me.
But a lot of people use it.
I've been lucky enough to have the kind of career where I've gotten to see the people and events that have really shaped modern history. And I was lucky, when I was a kid and I thought about being a reporter, and it's something I decided I wanted to be pretty young. I never could have imagined being in a soccer stadium in the Zulu part of South Africa for Nelson Mandela's final campaign appearance before the first all-race elections in South Africa. I never could have imagined watching the Pope recover from an attempted assassination, or watching the House change hands for the first time in decades during the 1990s, during the Gingrich Revolution, and everything that brought. I've been fortunate to be in a lot of the right places at the right time. Algiers, when the American hostages in Iran were finally released and came off the plane for their first steps in freedom after 444 days being held by the Iranian regime. I've been a lucky guy. I've gotten to help Americans make sense and understand these events, and it's been a great ride.
Was there one of those issues that compelled your attention more than others, or did you find all of them fascinating?
I am lucky in that I'm pretty easy to catch my attention. I am broadly curious, interested in a great many things, so it's hard to get me bored.
So talk to us about an issue that is of significance and should be of significance to all Americans, sort of the changing nature of the United States in the 21st century. What has changed and what is going to change in the years ahead?
Well, 2010, a lot of this story is really told using dates. 2010 was the first year in modern American history where more children were born in the country who trace their ancestry to Africa, Asia, and Latin America than to Europe. And that means those babies, who are now 6 years old, were on the front edge of a demographic tidal wave that's reshaping the country, really reshaping who's an American. It's a story that began in 1965 with the Hart-Celler Immigration Reform Act, which was spearheaded by Senator Teddy Kennedy from Massachusetts. It rewrote the immigration laws that had been in effect for the previous 40 years and saw America choosing who entered the country on the basis, you would never say of race, it was on the basis of nationality, but Europeans had such a preferential quota system that the same number of Americans were allowed in from Belgium as from the Philippines. And not many Belgians wanted to come, but a lot of Filipinos did. And the 1965 Act reshaped the country by reshaping who could come. And by 2013, none of the major sending countries, birth countries of foreign-born Americans was in Europe. And that's a big change from earlier in our history when they were all in Europe and Canada and Mexico.
Do you think the average American understands what is happening? In some parts of the country, yes, because they're seeing it first, but overall, do you think they're prepared for this
I don't
change?
think they understand it, they see it, they understand its small manifestations. I don't think they see it big picture, and I don't think that when they personalize it, their neighbor, their kid's schoolmate, their letter carrier, the people who are cashiers at their local stores, they think those people are okay, but they think the vast mass of these people are a problem because they're worried that it's going to change the character of the United States. But their neighbors and friends and classmates are already here, and America's still America. There are now more than 40 million people in the country who were born somewhere else on the planet, and they, in turn, have had millions more children who are of what the Census Bureau used to call immigrant stock. So they understand the culture, understand a language of another place in the world. But America's still America. And the same anxieties that we brought to immigration in the 1870s and 1880s during the Ellis Island era, we bring to it now. It's a much bigger country. The percentages are constant, but the numbers are larger because it's a much bigger country today. So we have a hump to get over as a people. One of the things that makes people crazy, press 2 for Spanish. They tell me, you know, that makes me so, I get so mad when I hear that to continue in English, press 1, press 2 for Spanish. I always give them very simple advice. I say, if it irritates you, just don't press 2. It'll be fine. You know, we'll all just move on and you will be fine. It's those kinds of things. They're little signposts along the way to someplace else, but it's not the way it used to be. So it makes some people upset, makes them uncomfortable, makes them feel threatened, but we have gotten over it before and we will get over it again. But the lubricant is economic growth. We had about the same number of people illegally resident in the United States about 15 years ago, but the wheels hadn't come off the economy yet. So as long as everybody had jobs and everybody was getting raises and everybody was getting overtime, nobody really worried that much about it. Now that we've come through some tough years, they are worried about it, even though the same number of people are here. It's an interesting illustration of how our social sentiments can change in the face of other things that are happening in the wider world, in the wider economy. You know, America is no longer the overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly Christian place that it was. The ascendant Protestant culture that took root in the late 18th century and was really in charge of everything that mattered until the late 20th century has moved on, and we have to create a consensus culture for a pluralistic society because if we don't, we're going to have real problems. This is not something we have a choice about. The reality is already here. What we do with the hand we've been dealt is what will tell the rest of the story.
Well, let's talk further about the foreign language issue. There seems to be the perception that if there are foreign language options, you're not going to assimilate as easily. Is that the reality, or are people who speak Spanish or some other language actually assimilating as immigrants always have?
It's one of those things that we happen to know a lot about. It's measured, it's quantified, it's tracked. English language acquisition is happening at the same rate as it's always happened. We know that the older you were when you arrived in the country, the less easy it is to acquire English. And that was true whether you were arriving from Naples in 1910, from Latvia in 1895, you know, or from France in 1840. It was the same. If you came as an adult, it's just harder. You do it eventually, in most cases, but your kids find it much, much easier, and your grandkids, if the American pattern holds true, hardly speak the language. And by your great-grandkids, they know the names for foods, holidays, and relatives, but they don't know much more than that. It'll be interesting to see, because the pattern of Spanish arrival in the United States is different from other ethnic groups, whether the loss of Spanish will happen at the same rate. That bears watching, because other immigrant groups had a run-up, a spike, and then a subsidence, and then it peters out to nothing. Russian speakers, Polish speakers, Italian speakers. So after the arrivals peter out, the old people move through their life changes, and the language peters out. Daily use of the language as a language of communication, of commerce, and all that. Because Spanish speakers arrive, and it's never petered out. All that's changed is the country from which they come. The loss of Spanish as a language of daily communication may take a lot longer, may not happen in quite the same way, but the acquisition on the other end of English is happening, and kids are learning. If you arrive at high school age, it's tougher for you than if you arrive at kindergarten age. If you arrive at kindergarten age, you speak accent-less English by the time you're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. We know all these things. So everybody should just take a deep breath and relax. It's going to be okay.
Talk to us about the history of Spanish in what is now the United States. This is not a recent development
If you
for this country.
look at the lands that are now the 50 states, Spanish was the first European language spoken in what is now the United States, and was spoken by more people than English for a lot of the 500 years since. Now, obviously, English has tremendous primacy since the founding of the United States and the expansion of the United States. But even today, the U.S. is among the top countries in the world for this number of people who speak Spanish, right up there with Mexico and Spain in the number of Spanish speakers, and not as people who know how to say gracias and hasta luego, but people who really know how to speak the language. It's right up there, more than Spain, about the same as Mexico. It's a major language in this piece of land. It was being spoken for decades before English arrived here, because people tend to think about the East Coast as where the United States begins, instead of having sort of a continental view of the origins of what's now this country. But when a column led by Juan de Oñate comes north from Mexico City in the late 16th century, they arrive in what's now New Mexico, found Santa Fe. Around the same time, San Agustin is founded on the coast of Florida, St. Augustine, and sometime later, the string of missions that runs all the way from what's now San Diego, all the way up past San Francisco to what's now Northern California, a string of military and commercial and religious bases of the Spanish Empire all the way up the coast. It's why people are sitting on the I-5 between San Diego and Los Angeles. Well, those are Spanish names that were given by Spanish priests and soldiers, and Spanish has very long, deep roots in what's now the United States.
What about some of the other languages? You mentioned the French influence and, of course, the British influence in the development of this country.
Because in the great imperial wrestling match between the French Empire and the Spanish Empire and the British Empire, France lost some key battles. French waned faster and over a longer period of time, but we should keep in mind that a quarter of all Canadians are native French speakers. And the further away you get from Montreal, the less likely you are to hear English when you're in the province of Quebec. Now, sometimes people who are hostile to the use of Spanish in the United States compare the United States to Canada and say, look, we don't want a situation like that. Do we? Do we want that? But Canada's very different. Enshrined in the Canadian Constitution is the notion, in so many words, spelled out in so many words, that Canada was founded by two nations. So this binational identity is built into the founding of the nation. We have no such thing. And speakers of other languages harbor no illusions that they can have a fulfilling, secure, affluent life by only speaking a language other than English, and they know their children can't succeed in the United States. They tell opinion researchers that year after year. And when we look at English acquisition patterns, whether you came from Ethiopia and speak Amharic, whether you came from Somalia, whether you came from the places in Africa and Asia, South Asia, where they speak some English but also languages other than English, these people are under no misapprehension that they can get by just speaking Bengali or Gujarati or Chinese. They know very well that they're going to have to learn, and their children are certainly going to have to learn English.
So what does all of this bode for the future of America? Do you see a difficult transition to this new reality, or a smooth transition, or a mix?
I think it depends on economics, because the social text, the social landscape will be created by economic realities, as it was in the 1890s when we came out of an era of boom and bust to become an economic superpower with years of tremendous growth that lasted all the way to the onset of the Great Depression. That helped assimilate and acculturate tens of millions of people who had come to the United States from Europe. They were considered part of the necessary precondition for continued growth. When I was at the closing of a steel mill in Northeast Indiana as a young reporter, I was walking through the company cafeteria where decades of steel workers grabbed their trays and went down the cafeteria line and got their lunch. And the instruction signs to not throw out your utensils and to stack your trays was in 5 languages. We managed when we had to. They weren't going to make too much of a problem out of the fact that you spoke Polish or Hungarian. Just don't throw out your silverware. And we're willing to put up a sign that says that as long as you keep making steel, which they did. Economic growth will make some of this go much easier. And if you think back to the booming 90s, nobody made that much of a hullabaloo about the people who were here illegally, the people who were here undocumented, because it felt like there was enough work for everybody. And you can pick up the papers from the late 1990s, look at the newscasts from the late 1990s. There just wasn't that everyday drumbeat of we have to do something about these people. There's roughly the same number of people here illegally as there were during the first George W. Bush term. It just wasn't a big deal. But economic stagnation and a feeling of unease about the future for yourself and for your kids have made people pay, justifiably, more attention to those issues. Economic growth will make some of those transitions and make the decisions that we make about who stays and under what terms and what the rules will be for coming and staying. We'll make different decisions if it's felt that we're entering an era of growth.
I guess what concerns me is we still have economic challenges. We've also been going through a period of, I think people have called it intensifying coarseness in American society over the last couple of decades. And we've seen that in the recent presidential campaign. Is all of that going to make this transition more difficult?
We will have a tough time washing away the hard feelings of this just past election. A lot of people felt that it was their permit, their license to say the things that common courtesy and sort of social lubricant required them not to say out loud. They were just things that you didn't say. And midwifed along by the internet, let's be honest, where you can sort of give yourself another name and give yourself another identity and go on and post horrible things. People have let fly with all kinds of crazy nonsense. And that's not something that evaporates after the last votes are counted. But some of that comes from the transition we were talking about earlier to a more plural America to a majority-minority America, where the primacy of whites of European ancestry is under numerical pressure, under economic pressure, under social status pressure. You know, if you were a white guy born in 1945, you could assume, justifiably and with very little contradiction, that your needs, your interests, and your desires were going to be catered to by various institutions and the establishment, because keeping white men happy was a pretty high priority thing. I mean, look at our politics, look at the economy of those years. The fact that black GIs and Mexican GIs were sort of cheated by the GI Bill. At the same time, the GI Bill did amazing things to put a rocket launcher underneath the white men soldiers being demobilized and heading home to their hometowns. Terrific, terrific stuff. Created the modern American middle class. Well, now that assumption that you could always count on being better than somebody is no longer going to be operative. It's not going to be as true in 2040 as it was in 1940, that the interests of Americans of European descent were going to hold primacy in the country, just as the interests of people who are conservative Christians can no longer be assumed to hold political primacy in a national level. They will at a state level for years to come, but at a national level, the opposition, for instance, to same-sex marriage on the part of conservative Christians was not enough to keep it from becoming the law. And those defeats are not something that's easily gotten over. I think in the case of gay marriage, the fact that the sky didn't fall and life just went on and people quietly got married and went about their business, eventually being angry about that and having a big head of steam about that just seems crazy. You burn yourself up over it, and yet life that meets you at your front doorstep hasn't changed very much. That kind of burns itself out. But some of these other things, you know, it's going to take some time for people to get used to a new political order, a new demographic order, a new social order, even in the context of a country that in many respects stays largely the same.
You said you decided early that you wanted to become a journalist, and you've done it for several decades. Is that always going to be your chosen profession, or do you have something else as we wrap up our conversation today, something else that you'd like to do?
I've just accepted an invitation to become a visiting professor of American Studies at Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I've never taught at any level before, much less at the university level. I think I'll be okay. It'll give me a chance to work on some things, because I'm going to start a fourth book now, and it'll give me a chance to finish it while I'm teaching. It's an exciting adventure. My wife is excited to go. The only person who's not excited is my daughter, who will be starting college at the same time. I thought she'd be happy for me. She said, "Where am I going to go during Thanksgiving break?" And I hadn't thought of it, frankly. I said, "Well, you know, home is wherever me and Mommy are." And that didn't drive her crazy as an answer. She didn't like the sound of that, and she certainly didn't like the sound of not being able to see her high school buddies when she's back home from college. So we're going to have to work that part out, but I'll be heading to Amherst. I have to, maybe I'll ask you for some pointers on
Absolutely.
Tweed jackets and patches on the elbows and a pipe and all that, and I'll be ready.
Great. Well, we thank you so much for joining us today, Ray Suarez.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.